with me today, we're so honored to have with us our guest, Kahan David Heimerman. Kahan David Heimerman is one of the engineers that assisted the witness Israel Hawkins in measuring the temple. This event of measuring the temple is one of the identifying markers, identifying who is the witness that is spoken of in the book of Revelation, chapter 11. Now, this is very significant. You may have heard about the two witnesses, and if you've been watching our program, you will know that we have been covering this subject for a few weeks, and now we're going to be talking about each individual prophecy mentioned in the book of Revelation and as it relates to other books. Now, the prophecy in particular that we're going to be talking about today is found in Revelation chapter 11 and the first two verses. I'm going to read that before we get into this discussion so you have this information with you. In Revelation chapter 11, it states, "And there was given me a reed like a measuring rod, and the Malach stood, saying, Rise and measure the temple of Yahweh, and the altar and its confines, where they, inside the inner court of the temple, in other words." Verse 2, "But the court which is outside the temple leave out, and measure it not, for it has been given to the Gentiles." Now, many people read this scripture and do not have a clue of what it's talking about. But when we're done here today, you will see and understand the significance of this scripture. And that's really the subject I'm going to be discussing with our guest here today, Kahan David Heimerman.
I'm glad to be here.
I'm so glad to have you. What is the significance of this scripture? I think that a lot of people read it and they don't really fully understand it, and we want to get to that issue today. What is this? Why is this so important for us today here in this last days? Because this scripture is talking about the last days.
It is an excellent topic, and a lot of people are interested in discussing this prophecy. You read verses 1 and 2. I'd also like to read a portion of verse number 3 here in Revelation chapter 11, because it states, "And I will give my two witnesses to perform their prophetic offices." So verses 1 and 2 are referring to the witnesses, and in particular, like you mentioned, Yisrael Hawkins, Yahweh's last days witness. And so it was given to him, this prophecy was given to him to measure the temple. And it's very specific about what he was to measure. It says, measure the temple of Yahweh and the altar and its confines. And then in verse 2, as you read, it said, "But the court which is outside the temple, leave it out and measure it not."
Now, this was done. It was done by me. We showed exactly. We went there years ago and did a study on this Temple Mount. We have a perfect model of the temple that prophecy shows will be built beside the Muslim mosque, and that is getting ready to take place. In fact, the plans are already made to do so. That the temple will be built beside the Muslim mosque with a dividing wall in between, and the prophet Yekishka, or Ezekiel as they translated his name, actually prophesied this thousands of years ago.
So the temple that the witness Yisrael Hawkins measured, and he measured this in Israel. He measured the inner court, and he placed it on the Temple Mount at its correct location, its prophesied correct location. So this is very significant prophecy, and this prophecy in Revelation chapter 11 is in complete unity with Ezekiel chapter 40, chapters 40, 41, 42, 43, and 44. I believe Israel Hawkins became aware after the 67 war. Asher Kaufman, who is an Israeli, he did some archaeological work on the Temple Mount during that brief period of time when he was able to get on the Temple Mount after the 67 war and take some measurements himself to locate certain key landmarks on the Temple Mount. And he published an article, Dr. Asher Kaufman, he published an article, and Israel Hawkins became aware of that article, and he realized that that location that Asher Kaufman had identified is in agreement with Ezekiel chapter 40 through 44 and with Revelation 11 verses 1 through 3. And Israel Hawkins recognized that this was in agreement with the inspired scriptures, and so then he proceeded to confirm those measurements by, as it states here in Revelation chapter 11, rise and measure the temple of Yahweh, which is what he did. And he did that in a series of trips to Israel, walking on the Temple Mount and doing what he needed to do with several people that he was working with, several engineers, and he confirmed these measurements. And these measurements that he confirmed were then turned into drawings and plans, plan and elevation views of the temple, of the inner court, which you see in the model behind us here. Right. And this subsequently led to a design patent on the plans, and this design patent has been filed in the United States and in the nation of Israel. Okay. So this prophecy about measuring the temple began with the recognition of the true location of the temple, the confirmation of the measurements, and the overseeing by Israel Hawkins, the overseeing of the design drawings, and then the overseeing and the following through with the design patent for the temple plans and the filing in the United States and Israel.
Wow. So you see, was quite a bit to these two verses. You just read it like that, but to fulfill these two verses required lots of trips to Israel.
Yes, it did.
Working with engineers.
Yes, it did.
Confirming these measurements that they're in line with what was inspired in the prophecies, and to the extent of filing these drawings with the patent office. So it was quite an involved feat here.
Yes.